Today we'll be discussing the Lobster N1A2 and we're going to talk about how to properly set up your rivet nut for your application. A couple things are factored into that. The Lobster N1A2 has a pull force of around 4,000 pounds every time you pull the trigger. So the force is the same, but there's two adjustments that we'll make on the tool. One of the adjustments is the depth at which the rivet nut is loaded onto the mandrel. The other adjustment is the length or the strength of the pull, which we'll note here, and we'll come back to here in just a second. So first, we have our rivet nut, and we'll load it on. This tool does feature a self-loading with an air motor, so when air is onto the tool, if you just hold the rivet nut up to the mandrel, it will spin and clutch out once it's seated out. But for safety purposes, we won't have air connected today so that we can set the proper depth for your mandrel. So if you'll notice, I've threaded it on just like it was, and you'll notice that the mandrel is barely sticking out of the rivet nut. What we want to do is have basically one pitch thread exposed to have it properly set. So in order to do that, we'll back the rivet nut off and we'll loosen the lock nut. Which I need a wrench for. Okay, once we've broken loose the lock nut, we'll thread it back to give us room for adjustment. And we needed a little bit more depth, so we'll thread that back. Not quite lock it in, and we'll just do everything finger tight. Run our rivet nut back on. If you notice now, from the side, you'll see that the mandrel is exposed past the rivet nut. We're not quite there yet. So I'm going to loosen that lock nut, leave the rivet nut on, tighten it just a little bit further in. And now we have about one thread pitch showing. So that's the proper depth. And then we'll take that finger tight with our lock nut and then snug it down with a wrench. So that's how you properly set the depth of the rivet nut on the mandrel. And you'll notice, depending on your fastener, different depths. As you can see, these two side by side. One's a little bit longer than the other. So different rivet nuts will have different depths, and that's fully adjustable on your N1A2 right out of the box. The second thing that we're going to look at adjusting today is the stroke or the length of pull. You'll notice that there is a adjustment and a scale here that you can see on this tape that's on the tool. First thing you need to do to make that adjustment is you need to pull the retaining ring back. That allows for the stroke length adjustment to be turned. Once you've done that, you can make your adjustment. The scale is on a 0 to 6 scale, and that's in millimeters. And you'll notice on the side, what I call macro adjustment. So you can set 0 to 6, and then in the center here you have another arrow which you can set your micro adjustment, so you can have increments of a millimeter. The way you determine your stroke pull, your tech data sheet for your rivet nut will give you that information. Also, if you don't have that available, you would determine and measure your material thickness and reference your rivet nut and look in the manual of the N1A2, and there's a chart provided that will show you the millimeters of stroke that you need according to your material thickness. The reason this is important, as you can see, we've pulled a couple improperly and the rivet nut turns. If we have proper stroke adjustment on that rivet nut with the metal thickness, the rivet nut does not turn and is securely in place, which is a proper installation of that rivet nut. These rivet nuts are properly installed. These two are improperly installed and can be turned. They need a longer stroke, and that can be adjusted where we just talked about here. So if we had this set at 3 millimeters and we had that loose, we can measure the thickness of that metal and make the adjustment, say to maybe 4 millimeters, 4.5 millimeters on this scale by pulling this back and then rotating the dial to where you need it, then letting that lock nut set back in place so that it's not accidentally changed, and that'll address that stroke and give you a proper installation like we see here. If you have any questions, reach out to your account manager or specialist and they'll be glad to help you with it. Anytime we're making any adjustments on this tool, please use the Lobster approved wrench that is provided. It's a UM46. It's machined specifically to go on the flats of the N1A2 in both places and properly fit, and that way you don't do any damage to your tool.